friend of ours, whose name is Radhya, once she was in India, at the monastery where I was living, the monastery of Sera. I was really just a boy at the time. I was 17, and and she spent. She was studying Tibetan medicine, and she spoke a little bit of Tibetan, and in this period, I think she was there for about 5 years, and she was teaching English. Just checking the sound. There's a noise. And one day, she went to one of her students who was a lama at this monastery, and he was a classmate of mine. He was a bit younger than I was. Actually, had about 5 or 6 years. He was about 5 or 6 years younger than me. And his name is Silong Tongpo Rinpoche. And at the time he was actually just about 5 or 6 years old, and she went to him and said, "My birthday is coming up. I'm turning 18." She was there at the monastery, and she said that she was going to have a little party. So there would be momos, some food to eat, and she was inviting some of her friends there to eat something together. I mean, that was it, no? And so she went to invite him, and when she went to invite him, I said, "Well, I don't understand. What are you inviting me to?" "No, because it's my birthday." And he said, "What? I don't understand. What are you celebrating?" "Because it's my birthday." He said, "Well, I'm coming because you've invited me, but I don't know why you're celebrating your impermanence." I mean, this 5-year-old boy says. Then, if we go to look, I mean, I've met so many people in Tibet, mostly Tibetans, who come from previous generation, let's say born, 30 years ago, and most of them, 30 years before, most of them didn't even know, they don't know their own birthday. And if you ask most of them how old they are, they need to really reflect upon it before answering, because the only thing that they know was their zodiac animal in which they were born. So, okay, so they need to calculate. Okay, this is the year of the dragon, and I'm born from the year of the rabbit, and so I need to make all the calculations to figure out how old I am. Instead, we live in a reality where we're absolutely fixated on years. Even today, I've seen actually parents celebrate the complimese, the birthday, celebrating the month, Then it's the month, and then how many years, and if somebody dies, and then the first question is how old were they when they died? We're fixated. So there's on one side one culture where years have just have no importance. When someone dies, no one asks how old they were. Most wouldn't even know how to answer. Instead, we're the opposite, and so I wanted to reflect on a point together today. So, what is time? A definition of time that I read 2 days ago that made me reflect. It says that time is the unit of measure of change. This is a definition based on physics, not on Tibetan philosophy. Time is the unit of measure of change, because time doesn't exist in an absolute way, but only in a specific way, because time is nothing other than the way in which we measure the interaction and change, the transformation of something. Time changes following the place and the person. So my time is different than yours. And in our history, it was Newton who created this idea of absolute time. And this concept where time exists, that there's a time that exists that would be the same for everyone. Like what I am living, you are living. And from this, you know, watches were created showing this kind of absolute time, this time that transcends the individual, that goes beyond my experience, where I am, where you are, your experience. So let's not go into aspects of physics that I think are absolutely beautiful, but I'm not the right person to talk about this. Where, for example, there's something I need to really understand it well, in practice, what it actually means. But according to physics, it's described that time goes by. Time is different in the high mountains than down in the plains. So you can buy these you can take watches, these really sophisticated watches that are absolutely synchronized. They cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and you put one in the high mountains and one in the plains. After a while, they're not synchronized anymore. The closer we are to the mass of the earth, the center of gravity, then time passes more slowly, and it passes more quickly in the high mountains. So, which means that more things happen compared to this absolute time. So we say goodbye to our friend, so the one that's at the seaside, and then we go into the high mountains. It means that more things actually happen in the high mountains because more time has passed. But what I want to get to is that when we say time, we're strongly connected to this idea of this absolute time. Even we say, how is it possible that I get to if I go to the seaside and you go up to the mountains, how is it possible that you have lived more time than I have, if time is time? They have, because there have been more change. There's more time because there's more change, and movement is different. And I wanted to reflect together about, before getting to this reflection, there's another point. Up to a very, very short time ago, so when man started measuring time for his own daily actions, the day was the day was divided into 24 parts, where there was they had 12 parts from dawn to dusk, and dusk to night, day and night. And in China, for example, it was named by animals. It was like when we find ourselves at the time of the rabbit, because there are the 12 zodiacs for the day, and then there are the 12 zodiac signs for night. The only one I remember is the one at dawn, which is the rabbit. Nam Lam Yu in Tibetan means the birth of the sun, the dawn, and the hour of the rabbit, according to also Tibetan astrology. So because the day was divided into these 12 zodiacs. So in many parts of the world it was like this for thousands of years. But with one particular aspect, up until the 1800s, it was like this. And around the 1800s, what happened? Every small or large city had his bell with the watch, and there was a meridian. The meridian is the sundial, and every city were synchronized with their own sundial. So so noon always was always when this sundial was when the sun was in the middle, and everyone needed to synchronize their time with this sundial, because the first hours of the day were dawn, and that began the 12 hours of the day, and it was never the same, because noon was when the sun was in the middle of the sky. And so what happened is when you would go from one city to another, maybe time wasn't the same. An example, between Florence and Turin, there was a half an hour difference, because there's a distance. So noon in one place and noon in another place, it's not the same. There's a difference, and between each place there was a difference between when noon struck, and that was normal, no problem. When they invented trains, where man was able to travel more quickly, they needed to organize themselves. What time does the train leave? What time does the train arrive? And at that point, they needed to have an idea of time that could be shared among different places, and they needed to synchronize time among them. Then after, this is something, this was nice to think about, that at the beginning of the times of train, the central train station of Paris, which was very important, the 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 clock of the train station was a little bit different than the clocks of the city. It was just a little bit. It was a little bit late, to make sure that the passengers wouldn't risk arriving too late. So there really wasn't this idea of absolute time. Then what happened? When there was the invention of the telegraph, it says, I send you a message, and they needed to have this necessity to have a synchronized time, even on an international level. And at the beginning, the idea that they had, which was about 1880, the idea was there was going to be one time for the whole planet. What time is it? It's 12 o'clock. In one country it meant one thing, in another country meant another thing, but it was always 12. That was the first idea, but then that didn't work, because people were used to 12 being with the sun high in the sky. And then in 1933 they reached an agreement to make time zones, where every country, noon was more or less like a half an hour before or a half an hour after the sun was right in the middle of the equinox. So my main point in all of this is that the watch, the way we live it, that conditions our life in a crazy way. We follow constantly this absolute time. It's a part of our life, and then only because only for a need of international communication and transportation. Up to that point, one lived the time of, 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 of eating, for example. It wasn't the time of the watch, but it was the time of the sun, which with the sun always in high in the sky. I mean, it changed, winter to summer. Um, the time is just an abstract time, abstract idea. Instead of basing ourselves on the position of the sun. I mean, we even on a cellular level, on a molecular level, they're called. We have what's called like these internal clocks that are synchronized with night and day. And I've understood. This is what I've understood. So it's it's that's another reason why it's really bad to be awake at night and sleep during the day, because our body is actually synchronized to night and day. So having said this, let's get back to the reflection that I wanted to share. Time is described as this unit of measure of change. So how much time has gone by? Let's try to forget for a minute clocks and watches, because if we talk to someone before 1890 around, if you ask that person how much time has changed, they would have a really different concept of that. Instead, today, this concept of time, that is this abstract idea of time, is so normal, but is but it's just what they've taught us at school, because our ancestors didn't have this idea of time. Just ask a Tibetan, how old they are. They have a totally different idea of time and passing of time. So once time is not anymore something that's absolute, but a unit of measure of change, where we try to measure how much has changed, what has happened, how much has changed. From this, what happens is we go back to the importance of interactions, the importance of change. The fact that, that we are beings that are in constant transformation, and what's important is not how much time on the clock has gone by, but what changes have actually come about. I don't know if this is clear. There's this difference. It's fundamental. The point is not that time is going by. The point is, what changes are actually happening. If there's not interaction, there's no time. If there's no change, there's no time. Time is nothing other than a representation of the interaction of change. So, if we tried to just free ourselves from this idea of absolute time, and we try to focus more of our attention on this idea of change, as I've said before, why do things change? Because they interact. The stronger the interaction is, the stronger the transformation is, the change. And let's remember that, what does change mean? It means to transform. Change means the moment in which any phenomenon interacts with another, it is no longer the same. As soon as there's an interaction between parts, naturally, among parts, naturally, there's transformation, there's change. There's this natural, continuous movement among everything. And what's important among in all of this, I mean, we are we're living beings, but we're sentient beings. The difference being a living being can be a plant, of a stone. Those are living beings. A plant has its birth, its life, its death. They're beings that interact. The difference between a living being and a sentient being is that a sentient being is also a living being, but in addition, there is consciousness that allows for interaction, not just with natural and spontaneous mechanisms, reactions. Because a plant, once understands the mechanism of a plant, it's easy. It's easy because once you do like this one thing, the plant reacts like this. Imagine it's easier to be with plants. Imagine, if plants were more like people, and just one day they're a little upset and they say, no, today I don't want to flower. But once we understand and we learn the language of plants, and we understand that they interact in this way, then it becomes much easier with a sentient being. Instead, it's different because we interpret, we observe, we analyze, we react, we have emotions, attractions, aversions, we have our own interpretation of reality. But this brings us to a different degree of freedom. It's because we have this consciousness, we have a mind. It's because of that then we have this freedom. Because if we didn't have a mind, then we wouldn't have the freedom to choose. We would just react according to the rules, this pre-established, let's say, rules that do change according to interaction, but they're rules through which one works. A stone is like this. A stone is also a living being. It has its birth, it has the duration of its existence, and then death. But let's leave stones aside for a minute. What happens is that as sentient beings, we have this marvelous characteristic of being able to choose. As we've said many, many times, this is not just for human beings. It's for all sentient beings, all beings who have minds. Then we could spend hours talking about whether a tree has a mind or not. There are those who say yes, those who say no. In Buddhist texts, they say no, but this is not the point of today's talk. The main point is understanding that once we have a mind, and I just wanted to specify that it's not just human beings who have this freedom. There are many, many forms of life who are sentient beings. But we have a mind. And this allows us to interact in a different way. It allows us to be in the front of a situation and direct ourselves in one way or another. Our freedom is actually very small. It's minimal. Because in front of any situation that I am going to live in this present moment, I'm not free from my past experience. I'm not free from the actions that I committed in the past, my karma. or these mental conditionings that I have generated. I'm not free from the context in which I find myself, the interaction that I have. I'm not free from the education that I received or the social cultural context in which I grew up, the traumas that I've accumulated. I'm not free of any of that. And in front of that, when I find myself in front of a situation, my reaction is strongly conditioned by all of that which I am. Is that clear? That's why if I were you, probably I would do something extremely similar to what you do. Because our level of freedom is really reduced. But where can we find it? One way to find it is when we find ourselves in a kind of crossroads. Do I do it? Do I not do it? Is there another possibility? Do I say it? Do I not say it? Should I react? Should I not react? We have this freedom. And I take it for granted. Do I stop for a minute and reflect about it? We have this freedom, but this minimum freedom that exists in interacting in every moment is a minimum of freedom, but it's present in every instant of our lives, which makes it absolutely enormous. Because in that small amount, but that's present and constantly, it becomes something enormous. But the difficulty that comes is that this freedom to be able to use it well, we need to have generated the strength to have generated the strength to not let ourselves be taken by our conditionings and habits, because our habit is to react. But when we're reacting, we're abandoning our own freedom. And then we just become plant, where there's one thing and we just react based on what we have lived and etc. Based on what we have become up until then. Instead, we have this ability to stop for a minute and say, no, I'm going to do differently. Better, maybe it's better not to say. And we've talked about this many times. This fact that we have inner states, emotional states that are harmful, like anger and jealousy and envy and fear and arrogance, dissatisfaction, etc., etc. So we're quite conditioned and used to being like this, even if it's harmful and it hurts us. This step to make a concrete change is where, when we find ourselves in front of any situation and we're able to see that anger, nervousness, or dissatisfaction or envy is arising, a very important step is to not materialize that feeling, that emotion. To not materialize means not transform that feeling or that conditioning into words or actions, into an interaction. Every time a negative feeling arises, or anytime a feeling arises and I act verbally or mentally, I am strengthening it. So I can also materialize it mentally by entering into a mental dialogue. So a whole inner dialogue with that emotion. That's also another way to strengthen and materialize, to nourish that that emotion. So what does this have to do with time? So much. Because if time is the measure of time, the unit of measure of interaction, and I have this freedom of interaction to direct myself in one way or another. In the end, what's important is not to measure what has changed, but looking at what has changed and how. What's important is not how much I have lived, but who I am in the face of this lived life. How have I changed? Who was born and who is going to die? What's important is not how much I live, how much I do, how much vacation time I have. That's not important. What's important is how you live it, how you live that vacation. It's not the time on your watch is not that important. How much time do I have to rest? What's important is whether I rest well or not how much time I have to rest. I've had experiences of sleeping for 11 minutes and then where I awakened absolutely full of energy, or times where I've slept a very, very long time. My record was 23 hours. It was once I came back from Borobudur and I was absolutely exhausted. I slept 23 years. Anyway, I just had lots of experiences of sleeping a lot and then waking up really lacking energy, not feeling great. So it's not how much time I have to rest is not important, but how, if I rest well or not. It's not about how much time we have together, but how do we interact with each other? How do we feel together? What do we become through this interaction? Because change is the fruit of interaction. We don't have the choice and the freedom to decide whether things change or not. This is inevitable. Everything from our thoughts and emotions, our being, our mind, the environment around us, everything is in constant transformation, constant change. And you can't do anything about that. But what does it mean to be and what does it mean to change? It means that there's interaction, it's interdependence. It means that there's interaction among parts, and among this very complex interaction, we have a very, very small amount of freedom. Because every time we see someone, or we meet someone, we talk, every word that we say, every choice we make, every thought that we have, we are directing our interaction. And as a consequence, we are changing in one way or another. So let's try to put effort and try to disconnect ourselves from this absolute time, this so-called time on the watch, and give. So it's not how old I am is not important, or how much time has gone by. Has it been a month, a year? It just doesn't matter. Let's try not to connect ourselves with that, but to observe more. I mean, what is happening? What are the interactions? And as a consequence, I mean, how are we transforming? Because that's what's really important. For a long time, I repeated that when we talked about time, I said what's not important. It's not the quantity that's important, but the quality. So it doesn't matter how long the vacation is, but what's important is how we live it. Often a day that's lived well, is worth much more than a year together. So the quality is important. So it's the same thing. In our lives, we need to try to unhook ourselves from this idea of absolute time, and that actually conditions our life tremendously, and try also to reconnect to the natural rhythms of nature. So to be to be less dependent on the clock. Of course, if I have an appointment with someone, and we say, okay, at what time shall we meet? Let's meet at the time. Um, at the time of at the time of saying in Italian, they used to say when this bird would sing, you know. So also just even a few years ago when the cell phone didn't exist, I remember once when I was in India and my mother came to see me, and we needed to meet in Delhi, and I had taken the airplane. I was living in the south of India, in Bangalore, and she came. She came on an international flight, and there was no cell phone. We needed to meet in the airport, and it was enormous chaos because I got to the domestic flight, and she was an international flight. I couldn't get from one part to the airport to the other, and I couldn't get through. I mean, it was about 3 or 4 hours, and at a certain point in all of this chaos, I see her from afar. I mean, we managed to meet, see each other. I remember stories of people, who hear stories of their grandparents, that then they would at some point fall in love with someone, and then at a certain point they would leave, and they would just go to the north of Italy or something to find that person, or maybe even go as far as America to find that person. They would take a ship to go find that person, and they would find each other. I imagine that there are also those who never found each other, but there are those who found each other. And today we're afraid of leaving without our cell phone. Oh, but where are we going to meet? How are we going to meet up? And if you're not, what am I going to do if you're not there? But it's important to come back a little bit to, let's call it, a more natural way of being, because at least I see it like this. On one side, having an instrument, having a tool that allows me to know where I am and where you are, etc. So we can meet up. It gives us a sense of security, but it also gives us a great sense of insecurity, because in a short time ago we'd say, okay, we'll meet up there, and somehow people were able to meet, So something else that's interesting, and I don't want to open this, and now it's already time to end, but to conclude. But it seems like today things are faster and we can do more. But I'm not that sure. In my opinion, maybe 30 years ago, or maybe even more, people were able to actually do more because people were more concentrated, they were more present. But beyond all of that, what I want to say is that let's try for a minute to unhook ourselves from this idea of absolute time. Of course, if I need to meet someone, and we set a time, but let's try for our own lives to untie ourselves from this absolute time and connect ourselves more to the time of nature, starting with the time of the sun. I'm not talking about having the awareness of all astrological elements. No, let's just watch the sun. and the moon. Let's start to see that we as human beings for millions of years, we would wake up with the dawn and go to sleep with when the sun would come down, and instead now maybe people wake up at 10 and go to sleep past midnight. I mean, there's something that's not right. I don't mean that we should change our habits, from one day to the next, all habits, but just to conclude, let's try a little bit to see our relationship with time and understand that there is no such thing as absolute time. What was you know what was it was brought to us, for cultural reasons, and it has its function. Even in a scientific. I'm not criticizing, for science and for conventional things, practical things is very useful, but it was created and it was applied in our society for very specific reasons, but not to just condition us the way it actually does. So let's try to release ourselves from this absolute time. It's not important how old I am. Time is just a unit of measure of change. And what's important with this unit of measure of change is what change has come about. And what do I mean by change? Change means interaction. So the ultimate question is how do I interact? With my body, with my speech, and with my mind. This is fundamentally important. Someone can have a very short time, according to this this idea of absolute time, but can be very, very long, considering the interaction and the change that's happened. For example, Alexander the Great, who conquered half of the world, at the age of 25. Einstein made marvelous discoveries very young as well. So what I mean to say is that what's important is not the time on our watch, but how we're living this time, in our lives, in our realities, small and big. Let's try to apply this. So I begin a day. I ask myself, how do I interact? How do I transform? And as a consequence, how do I participate in the transformation of the world that surrounds me? Here we need to pay more attention to. This is what we need to measure and give more value to. This is all for today. I thank all of you, and I wish you a very good day. And now let's do our dedications together.
Jitsun Lama Kutse Rapten Che Namkaratin Le Chokchur Gepadang Losan Tempe Dreme Sasum Ki Drove Munsela Taktu Ne Gyur Che Kewa Kuntu Yanda Lama Dang Dralme Cheki Pela Longche Ching Sadan Lamgi Yente Rabzone Dorje changi kopa nyur tobo sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin ninsen takto delek pe koncho sumki jingilo koncho sumki ngodrubotsol koncho sumki trashisho. All'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i tre gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni. possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Buona giornata a tutti. Grazie.